I want to talk to you guys about something called the Dyatlov Pass. Now, have you heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident?
No.
Isn't
No?
Dyatlov someone involved in Chernobyl?
No. Maybe.
No.
I mean, it
I
may be a
haven't heard
common
of it.
name.
I've heard the name Dyatlov.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's all.
I
you
don't
need
know what the Dyatlov Pass is.
Okay, so I'll tell you what went on with that. So, on the 23rd of January, 1959, which, as you both will know, was a long time ago, there was a group of students. They basically were going on a cross-country skiing trip during the Cold War. It was in the middle of winter, and there were 10 students that were going on this trip, and they were led by Igor Dyatlov, and they were going on a trip to the Ural Mountains, which divides Europe from Asia. They all knew what they were doing. So it was 8 men and 2 women. As I said, Igor was leading, and there were a bunch of other people, from the ages of about sort of 22 to 23, and then also a 38-year-old sports instructor. They were supposed to be on this trip for 3 weeks. This will go somewhere. Don't you worry.
Okay.
They were supposed to be on this trip for 3 weeks, and they were going to send a message to the sports club as soon as they made their way back to base on the 12th of February. But then it was about the 20th of February when they were thinking, okay, this has been too long. So they sent out people to look for them. There was a search party of volunteer students sent out. So they went to where they had been. And they couldn't find them. They couldn't find any trace of them until they found the tent that they had been staying in, and they found that it was covered in snow, and it had been like torn from the inside, been cut open from the inside.
Oh.
And when they went inside the tent, they found a bunch of normal stuff, just sort of blankets, some food, as though they were about to eat, but they didn't have time. Everything looked like it was normal, like it was in it had been used normally. There was no sort of major incident other than that sort of cutting of the tent from the inside.
Yeah.
So they were looking around outside the tent, to see what might have happened. They found footprints frozen in the snow from about 9 people, and who were not wearing shoes fully. So they either had socks, boots, or like one boot someone had on, or barefoot. Bear in mind, this is in Russia or in the Soviet Union in the height of winter.
Cold,
very cold.
Frostbite.
I think minus 20. It would have been roughly around about that. That's degrees Celsius, by the way. So this was a little bit worrying. So they were very confused about what had gone on here because they still hadn't found any bodies yet. So it turns out that one of the people on the trip was feeling ill and had gone back home, but the other 9 were still missing. And so it was minus 25 degrees Celsius was the temperature at that time. And it took them about a month to find all 9 of the bodies. Now,
whoa,
this is already a kind of odd story,
Yeah.
in that they go on a trip, they don't come back, and they're running out barefoot, one shoe on, and they've slashed open the tent from the inside.
Sounds like a murder mystery from like a TV show or something.
Okay, yeah, you say that, right? Now, there were horrible injuries going on here. So 6 of them had died from hypothermia. 3 had been was sort of blunt force trauma. One person had major damage to their skull. 2 people had chest trauma. One person had less damage to their skull. But that was not the weirdest part. Someone's tongue was gone. I think 2 of them had their eyes missing. One of them was missing their eyebrows. So it was very odd. The sort of picture that you've got here is people who are sort of half dressed, with like horrible like injuries on them, like properly like broken bones, cracked skulls, and missing eyes and tongues. So this has been a mystery for a long time. We don't really know what happened. We never really could figure it out. So the Russian authorities said that, and this is a quote you'll see everywhere, that there was a compelling natural force that had caused the deaths. Now, again, this was kind of closed, this case, and left as sort of a cold case, you could say.
Luke just nearly choked there.
Yeah, I saw. It was left as a cold case for decades until February in 2019. Russia basically opened the case again and said, we're going to try and get to the bottom of this. So many years later, so this is over 50 years, no, 60, I think, 1959. Yeah, so on January 28th, in a Nature journal, there was a study published. So this study has kind of looked into all of the different sort of variables and figured out the most likely sort of cause for these deaths. So they've said that they've not solved it necessarily. They just have a good idea of what could have happened, essentially. So they think that it was an avalanche that might have caused those deaths. Now, the thing is that an avalanche had been sort of ruled out for four main reasons. First, there wasn't a sign of an avalanche when they went to the camp. So, you wouldn't have expected there to be an avalanche if there's literally no sign of it when you turn up.
Yeah.
Second, where they had set up their camp, it wasn't steep enough for an avalanche. So you've got to have an avalanche, bear in mind, is essentially a bunch of snow just tumbling down a mountain. And if you don't have a steep enough slope, it's not likely that an avalanche is going to happen. The third thing is that they left their tents long into the night. So long after they'd set up their tent, the avalanche would have happened, which is far, like a huge amount of time after you would have expected it to happen. So an avalanche would be most likely to happen when you're setting up your tent and cutting into the snow to make a sort of space for it.
Yeah.
Because you're disturbing the snow, and that's when it's most likely to happen. It's not likely to happen 6, 7, 8 hours later when you're all snuggled up in bed.
Yeah.
And then last thing is the injuries that they had. Now, when you've got an avalanche, it's not likely that you're going to get the kind of head and chest injuries that they had. It's because that's not usually where an avalanche is going to sort of hit you. And most people that die in avalanches, from what I read, it seems that you usually die from basically asphyxiation, being trapped under all of the
snow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there are sort of solutions to all of these problems that they've come up with in this study. So, basically, what they find out is that the avalanche sort of hypothesis is much stronger than we initially thought. So, for example, the first thing was the lack of sort of evidence of an avalanche when they went to find the sort of bodies. Now, the thing is that basically the angle of the slope was much steeper when they found the bodies than it usually is. So it's usually about 23 degrees. When they found the bodies, it was 28 degrees. So what that means is that the snowfall, after that avalanche, could have basically kind of like sort of hidden the evidence of the avalanche.
Right.
So snowfall in the subsequent weeks could have basically made it look as though there wasn't really an avalanche. Could have made it much harder to sort of figure out. So it makes the slope look smaller and covered the signs of the avalanche, is what they said. So the second sort of part, the fact that the slope wasn't steep enough. So 30 degrees apparently is the kind of slope that you need to have for an avalanche to be triggered. But apparently you can have avalanches at much less steep slopes. And apparently 15 degrees, there's evidence of avalanches happening at slopes as little as 15 degrees. What they found out was that the type of snow on the mountain was called depth hoar or sugar snow, which is basically sort of a crystallized ice that makes avalanches more likely. And apparently that could have caused something called a slab avalanche, which is where basically kind of a slab of snow breaks off from the hole and slides down. So not only have we got solutions to the sort of lack of evidence of the avalanche and lack of steep enough slope, we've got that. There's also the other ones, the other sort of issues that they've basically almost solved. The delay between them cutting into the slope to put up their tent and the avalanche actually happening. So like I said, you'd expect the avalanche to happen when you cut into the slope, but they figured out that essentially there could have been strong winds that could have added more and more snow onto the top layer near where they were camping. And that would have basically let that snow accumulate for hours, about maybe apparently 9 to 13.5 hours. It could have been accumulating and then it could have fell, which is why there was the delay. So we basically solved 3 of the 4 big issues, and then the final one is the injuries. Now, the thing is that these injuries are not really consistent with most avalanche injuries.
I was going to say, like, missing tongues and missing eyes aren't usually what you would, I imagine,
No.
not what you'd expect.
No, not at all what you'd expect. And even the cracked ribs and skulls. Apparently, what they've said here is that those are more like what you'd get in a car accident than what you'd get in an avalanche. So, what the idea here is that this avalanche that happened was an atypical avalanche essentially, and what the conditions of them sort of being caught in the avalanche were different from most conditions because they weren't climbing, they weren't prepared for anything like that.
Yeah.
They would have been asleep in their tents. Most of them were lying down, and if you have a huge slab of snow hitting you from that from sort of while you're lying down as opposed to when you're standing up, it's going to hit you and could break your ribs or crack your skull because it's hitting them basically from the top. So that solves that issue. And the thing is that they did simulations with this to figure out the sort of injuries that you could get. And yeah, from their simulations, they found out that their injuries are consistent with this particular kind of avalanche, this particular kind of sort of slab of snow falling on you while you're lying on your back. Now, the way that this is really the interesting part about this. The reason that this caught my eye was because of the model that they used for the snow. Now, this is just utterly ridiculous and fantastic. The reason that they got to this sort of final piece, the reason that they figured out this sort of last thing using this models of snow, they didn't build their own model. They used essentially the sort of software from Frozen, the Disney film Frozen, to build their models of snow because they were. So what it says here is that the researchers were really, really impressed by the snow in the movie, and so basically Disney shared the animation code that they used to sort of make the snow in the film with. They shared it with the researchers, and so. The researchers used that and ran sort of simulations with the snow moving at different speeds, in different sort of like formations, like different sort of weights of blocks, and they managed to basically use the animations from Frozen to figure out the injuries you could sustain from different kinds of avalanches, which is ridiculous. So essentially, throughout all of this, what they've done is they figured out using Frozen, which only brings us more. It's more and more each time. Using Frozen, they've managed to figure out that the Dyatlov Pass mystery was probably just a very atypical avalanche that caught people by surprise. And the reason for the missing eyes and tongues and whatnot. So the reason that they were basically sort of dragged out away from the tent is it could have really injured some people and injured other people a little bit less. So they slashed the inside of the tent to get out. They dragged the injured people away, and it's in the dead of night. It's in the dead of winter. It is far, far below freezing, and they're not dressed for the cold. So they're trying to survive. But then the ones that have been gravely injured die from their injuries, and then the others die from hypothermia. And then potentially some wildlife comes along and starts eating out tongues and eating out eyes and whatnot. So that is sort of the Dyatlov Pass mystery, and that's how science has potentially solved it. Now, again, I want to say the researchers haven't claimed to have completely solved it. They've basically just come up with this first sort of scientific evidence for this avalanche theory. Again, using Frozen. The Disney film Frozen. So Frozen basically was used to solve a decades-old mystery, which I think is lovely.
So fitting as well. In the middle of winter.
Oh, yeah.
Frozen,
Love the idea that somewhere in the Soviet or somewhere in now Russia, there's an animation file with Elsa and Olaf running out of their tent and getting smacked in the face by a giant slab of ice.
I do enjoy the idea that you think they'd have used the character models as well.
Oh yeah, no, you got to. You got the software. What? Why would
Kristoff's missing his eyes?
Yeah, Disney's going to use that for Frozen 3. They are not pulling any punches. Yeah, no, but that's my story for this week: the Dyatlov Pass mystery and how science can be used to solve decades-old cold cases.
If you enjoyed that clip, head over to patreon.com/SCI GUYS where you can find the full show. Or you can stay here and catch up on old SCI GUYS episodes. Or you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at SCI GUYS Pod to find out when we're doing more live shows.